The wheels of the freight wagon bit into the frozen mud, then slipped, and the whole wagon groaned like a dying animal. Outside, the world had shrunk to a narrow canyon of gray rock and the first thin flakes of snow. Inside, Clara pulled the moth-eaten wool blanket tighter. It did almost nothing against the cold. The chill was not just in the air. It was in her bones, a deep, settled cold that had started the day her husband, Thomas, had been lowered into the hard Pennsylvania ground. She was 23 years old, a widow. But that was not the whole truth. A widow had choices, even if they were poor ones. Clara had none. Thomas had left behind a stack of papers, debts owed to men who did not care about a wife's grief. They had wanted the farm. They would have taken everything, leaving her with nothing but the clothes she wore. Then the letter had come, from Wyoming Territory, from a man named Silas Mercer. He was a name on a page, a cattle baron who had known her father long ago. He had offered a bargain. He would pay Thomas's debts, every last cent. The farm would be clear. In exchange, she would come west. She would be his wife. Clara clutched the small, worn Bible in her lap. Her fingers were numb, but she could feel the hard edges of the contract tucked inside. It was not a proposal of marriage. It was a bill of sale. She had traded her future for her past, her body for a few cleared ledgers. She was cargo, just like the sacks of flour and barrels of salt that rattled behind the canvas partition. The driver, a heavy-set man named Riggs, had spoken maybe 20 words to her in 3 days. He had looked at her with a flat, empty gaze when she'd climbed aboard in Cheyenne. She was not a passenger. She was freight, to be delivered. "We're close," he grunted, his voice muffled by the wind. "Mercer's Valley." Clara braced herself as the wagon lurched into a final, violent dip. She peered through a gap in the canvas. The pass was opening up. Below them lay a vast, snow-dusted basin, walled in by dark mountains. In the center, a cluster of dark log buildings sat like a stain on the white land. It looked cold. It looked empty. There was no welcoming party. There was no smoke from the bunkhouse chimney. As the wagon slid to a halt in the frozen yard, only one figure detached itself from the shadows of the main cabin's porch. He did not step forward. He just leaned against a support beam, arms crossed, watching. "That's it," Riggs said. He climbed down, his knees popping in the cold, and went to unhitch the team, not even giving Clara a look. She waited. Surely this was not Silas Mercer. The man in the letter had sounded old, established. This man was lean, hard-edged, and looked to be near her own age. He wore rough canvas trousers tucked into worn boots, and a sheepskin coat that looked as weathered as he did. His dark hair was too long, and his eyes, even from this distance, were shadowed. Clara finally pushed the canvas aside and climbed down, her legs stiff and aching. The cold hit her face like a slap. She stood by the wagon wheel, feeling small and terribly out of place. The man on the porch just watched. "I am Clara," she finally called out, her voice thin in the huge, cold air. "Clara Bellows. I am here for Mr. Mercer." The man pushed himself off the post. He moved with a slow, deliberate grace that was almost like an animal's. He stopped 10 feet from her. His eyes were dark. Yes, but more than dark. They were flat, empty of welcome. "He's delayed," the man said. His voice was a low rasp, like stones grinding together. "Delayed?" Clara's stomach tightened. "Where? When will he return?" "Don't know." He gestured with his chin toward the main cabin. "You'll wait inside." He did not offer to take her bag. He just turned and walked back to the porch. Clara looked at Riggs, who was already leading the horses toward the barn, his back to her. She was alone with this silent, rough stranger. Left with no choice, she grabbed her single carpet bag and followed him. The inside of the main cabin was vast, dark, and cold. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, But the hearth was black and swept clean. Furniture, heavy and dark, huddled in the gloom. It did not feel like a home. It felt like a barracks. "Where is everyone?" she asked, standing just inside the door. The man was already at the hearth, stacking kindling. "Winter crew. Most are gone. Bunkhouse is empty. But Mr. Mercer, did he know I was coming today?" He struck a match. The flare lit his face for a second. High cheekbones, a strong jaw, a mouth set in a permanent, hard line. He knew. He got the fire going. He did not look at her. "There's a room," he said, pointing to a door down a short hall. "Stove's in there. You'll stay there. For now." "For now?" He stood up and faced her. "I'm Eli Mercer." Clara searched his face, confused. "Mercer? Are you his son?" A flicker of something, anger, maybe, or just deep-set weariness, passed through his eyes. Something like that. He turned away. "Riggs will bring your trunk. Stay inside. A storm's coming. A bad one." He was right. By nightfall, the wind was not just blowing, it was howling. It shrieked around the corners of the cabin, a living thing trying to get in. Clara huddled in the small room Eli had given her. It was plain, furnished with a narrow bed and a small cast-iron stove. It was, she realized with a cold knot of dread, a servant's room. She spent that first night sitting in a hard-backed chair, her coat still on, listening to the storm and the sounds of the house. She heard Eli's heavy boots on the floorboards. He was in the main room, by the fire. She heard him go out, the door slamming against the force of the wind, and return some time later, his boots stomping snow. She was terrified, trapped. The man she was supposed to marry was gone, and she was left with this hard, silent man who looked at her like she was a piece of furniture he had not asked for. But the fear changed, slowly. Days passed. The storm did not break. It buried the world. The snow piled up to the windowsills, turning the daylight into a pale, gray gloom. The world shrank to the four walls of the cabin. Eli remained a distant, cold presence. He was rough, yes, his language, when he spoke to Riggs or the two other hands she glimpsed in the barn, was short and functional. But he never raised his voice to her. He never looked at her with the hungry, appraising stare she had come to expect from men. The look Thomas had given her. He was silent, but he was correct. He would leave a stack of firewood outside her door before she woke. When she emerged, shivering, into the main room, the big fireplace would be blazing and a pot of bitter coffee would be heating on the hook. He cooked, simple, harsh meals, beans and salt pork, or a tough steak from a freshly slaughtered steer. They ate in silence at the massive table, 20 feet of oak between them. He never touched her. He never sat near her. His coldness, she realized, was a kind of wall. He was not trying to frighten her. He was trying to ignore her. He gave her blankets. He gave her food. He gave her firewood. He gave her nothing else. On the third day, the wind died down just enough for Clara to feel she might go mad from the confinement. She saw Riggs and another hand, a skinny young man named Pete, struggling toward the barn. Eli was on the roof, shoveling the heavy drifts off before the weight cracked the beams. Clara pulled on her thin coat and stepped out onto the porch. The cold was shocking. She saw Pete stop and lean on his shovel, talking to Riggs. They were too far to hear, but they both kept glancing toward the house, toward Eli on the roof. She needed to go to the root cellar, which Eli had pointed out was just beside the porch. She pulled her shawl over her head and hurried down the steps, sinking to her knees in the fresh drift. As she passed the barn, the wind died for a moment, and their voices carried, sharp and clear on the frigid air. "I don't know what to do with her." Riggs was saying, "He won't say nothing. Just wait." "He's in charge, I guess," Pete said, his voice nervous. "Now that Silas is—" "He ain't in charge of nothing." Riggs spat. The sound hit the snow. He's just the half-breed, the engine's son. Silas never would have let him sit at the main table, and now he's in the main house with her. Clara froze. Her hand was on the cellar door. Heard Silas, took his mother. Pete whispered, like saying it loud was a danger. From a Comanche raid, years back. Just kept her in a line cabin till she died. And Eli, he's what's left. He's Mercer's shame, is what he is, Riggs said. And now the old man's gone, and he's stuck here with the old man's mail-order bride. It's a fine mess. A shadow fell over them. Clara looked up. Eli was off the roof. He was walking toward the barn. He moved without a sound on the snow. He was not wearing his heavy coat, just his wool shirt. He did not seem to feel the cold. Riggs, he said. His voice was not loud, but it cut through the air. Riggs straightened up, startled. Eli, we was just... Get back to the horses. Now, see here, Riggs started, puffing out his chest. You ain't... Clara did not see the punch. She just heard the crack. It was a sharp, wet sound, like an axe splitting green wood. Riggs folded, collapsing into the snow, a dark red stain blooming from his mouth. Pete cried out and scrambled backward, falling over his shovel. Eli, I didn't say nothing. Eli turned to him. He did not raise his voice. He did not move fast. Get him inside, and if you ever speak of my mother again, I will drag you from here to the pass by your own entrails. He did not shout. He said it like he was describing the weather. It was the most terrifying thing Clara had ever heard. He turned and looked directly at where she stood by the cellar door. She was trapped, exposed. He looked at her for a long, silent beat. His face was a mask of cold fury. He knew she had heard. Then he turned and walked back to the house, leaving the two men in the snow. Clara fled. She ran back to her room, her heart hammering. She did not come out for the rest of the day. That night, the snow returned, harder than before. The isolation was no longer just the storm. It was the secret. Silas Mercer was not delayed. He was gone. Dead, probably. And she was trapped here with his son, a man born of violence, who had just proven he was more than capable of it himself. The silence in the cabin was heavier. It was loaded. Eli sat at the table, cleaning his rifle, the lamplight catching the hard planes of his face. Clara sat by the fire, pretending to read her Bible, but the words just blurred. She began to suspect, with a sick, dawning dread. She knew Silas Mercer was not coming. When? She asked, her voice dry. Did you last see your father? Eli stopped his work. His hands, gripping the oil rag, were still. He did not look up. Been a while. How long? She pressed. Pass was clear last week. He rode to Marble Ridge for supplies. He rode in this weather. It wasn't this weather then. But he's not back. No. And you're not worried? He finally looked up. His dark eyes met hers. And there was nothing in them. No comfort, no anger, just a deep, cold emptiness. Worryin' doesn't change the snow, ma'am. He went back to his rifle. She was alone. She was in the hands of a man who was half savage, a man of violence, a man who lied to her with every silent meal. And yet, he had not touched her. He had not threatened her. He had, in his own brutal way, even defended her, or perhaps just his own name. She did not know. 2 nights later, the cabin was almost freezing. The fire had burned low, and Eli had not yet come back inside. He had been out for hours, trying to save a newborn calf from the cold. Clara huddled by the hearth, her fear warring with a strange, new anxiety. What if he did not come back? What if he fell in a drift? The door opened, letting in a swirl of ice and wind. Eli stumbled in. He was covered in snow, his face gray with exhaustion. He went straight to the hearth and held his hands out to the low flames. They were shaking, not just from cold, from strain. Clara saw his right hand. The knuckles, the ones that had met Riggs's jaw, were split open again. The cold had gotten to them, and they were weeping a thin, bloody fluid. He had been working for hours with that hand exposed. He grunted, trying to flex his fingers, hissing in pain. Clara watched him for a long minute. He was her jailer. He was a liar. He was, perhaps, a dangerous man, but he was also the only other human being in her world, and he was hurt. She stood. "Sit." He turned, suspicion hardening his face. "What?" "Sit down." She went to her room and dug into her satchel. She came back with the last clean strip of linen she owned and the small flask of whiskey her father had given her. Long ago. He did not move. "Give me your hand, Eli." He stared at her. His eyes narrowed, but he was too cold, too tired to argue. He slowly, reluctantly, sat on the hearth and held out his hand. She knelt in front of him. The cabin was quiet, save for the wind's mournful sound. She could feel the heat coming off his body, the smell of cold air and pine and something else, something musky and male. She took his hand. It was rough as a cob, scarred and calloused, but it was shaking. She uncorked the whiskey. "This will sting." She poured a small amount onto the raw, split skin. He sucked in a sharp breath through his teeth, a low hiss, but he did not pull away. His entire body went rigid. She took the linen and began to clean the wound. His hand was so large in hers, she felt the tremor in his muscles. He was close, so close. She could see the pulse beating in his throat, the dark stubble on his jaw. He was watching her, his gaze fixed on her face, intense and unreadable. She focused on the task. Her own hands were shaking now, but for a different reason. It was the nearness of him, the quiet intimacy of the act. She had not touched another person with kindness in... She could not remember how long. She finished cleaning the cuts. She looked at the scrap of linen. It was not very long. The wounds were wide. A nervous tension built in her chest. The silence was too loud. She fumbled with the cloth, trying to wrap it, trying to make it cover the worst of the damage. A small, choked laugh escaped her. It was a sound of pure nerves. "It's too small," she whispered, her voice tight. She was talking to the bandage, to her own clumsy fingers. "Will it fit?" He froze. It was not a subtle thing. His hand, which had been relaxing under her touch, became a stone. His entire body went stiff. His breathing stopped. The air in the room turned to glass. The words echoed, "Too small. Will it fit?" She had meant the bandage. God help her. She had only meant the scrap of cloth. But in the silence, in the darkness, with her fingers on his skin, the words hung there, naked and awful and loaded with a meaning she had never intended. Heat flooded her face, a deep, burning shame. She looked up. He was staring at her. His dark eyes were wide, fixed on hers, and in them she saw not anger, but a raw, aching shock, a vulnerability that stunned her. She dropped his hand as if it were a hot coal. "I meant the linen," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. "The bandage. It wasn't. I didn't mean—" Eli did not speak. He did not move. He just stared at the place where her hands had been. Then, slowly, he stood up. He was tall, and in the small space by the fire, he seemed to block out the light. He looked at his hand, still unwrapped, still bleeding. He looked at her, his face a mask of confusion and a deep, buried pain. Without a word, he grabbed his frozen coat from the peg and walked out the door, back into the blizzard. Clara sank onto the hearth, her body trembling. She had done something terrible. She had cracked the wall of his silence, and she did not know what she had let out. He did not come back that night. Clara waited by the fire until the last ember turned to gray ash, her shame a cold, heavy stone in her belly. When the weak gray light of morning finally seeped through the snow-caked windows, she saw him. He was in the yard, rhythmically swinging an axe, splitting logs from a massive frozen pine. He had been out there all night, or at least since long before dawn. She watched him from the window. He was a machine built of rage and cold. The axe rose and fell. Thunk, crack, thunk, crack. The sound muffled by the falling snow. He never stopped. He never looked toward the house. The silence between them, which had once been cold and empty, was now hot and sharp. It was a loaded gun. They lived in the cabin for days that felt like weeks. Two animals trapped in the same den, circling each other, terrified to make a sound. The storm, which had seemed to break, returned with a vengeance. It was no longer just a snowstorm. It was a blizzard, a white wall that erased the sky, the mountains, the world. The wind screamed, a constant, high-pitched mourner. Riggs and Pete were gone. Eli had sent them to a line cabin on the far side of the valley to check on a herd of stranded cattle. Just before the worst part of the storm hit, they were not coming back. Clara and Eli were completely, terrifyingly alone. The world shrank to the main room of the cabin. The cold was a physical presence, a giant that pressed against the walls. On the fourth day after her blunder, the wood pile inside ran out. Eli came in, caked in ice, and dropped the last of the logs by the hearth. He looked at her. It was the first time he had met her eyes in days. "I need to chop more," he said. His voice was raw. "The woodshed is drifted in. I have to clear it." He pulled on his heavy coat. Clara, who had been sitting in her chair for so long her muscles ached, stood up. "I'm coming," she said. He stopped, his hand on the door latch. "No, stay here." "I can't," she said, her voice shaking, but not from cold. "I cannot sit here anymore. I will go mad." He stared at her for a long beat. He seemed to see, for the first time, not the woman sent for his father, but just a person, as trapped as he was. He gave a short, sharp nod. "Get your coat." The wind almost tore the door from her grip. It was like stepping into nothing. The air was so full of ice and snow she could not breathe. Eli grabbed her arm, his grip hard as iron, and half dragged her in the direction of the shed. It was only 20 yards away, but it felt like a mile. He had to kick the door for minutes to break the ice that sealed it shut. Inside, it was dark, and the wind howled through the gaps in the boards. Stacks of uncut logs were piled high. Eli lit a lantern and hung it from a peg. He handed her a smaller hatchet. "You're not strong enough to split," he said, picking up the heavy maul. "But you can make kindling, like this." He took a split log, set it on the block, and showed her how to set the hatchet blade, how to tap it, how to use the wood's own grain. He did not waste a word. He just showed her. She took the hatchet. Her hands were clumsy in the thick mittens. She brought it down, and it glanced off the wood. "No," he said, his voice flat. He took her hands, repositioned them on the handle. His touch was impersonal, like a blacksmith positioning a piece of iron. "Don't swing, aim. Let the tool do the work." She tried again. The wood split. They worked. For hours. They worked. The only sounds were the crack of his maul and the tap-tap split of her hatchet. It was brutal, exhausting labor. Her arms burned, her back screamed, but with every piece of wood that fell, a piece of the terrible silence between them fell, too. They were not talking, but they were working. They were a team. They were surviving. This became their routine. The storm did not let up. It became their world. There was no day or night, only the howl of the wind and the tasks that needed doing. He taught her. He was a silent teacher, but a thorough one. The roof of the lean-to sprung a leak. He went out with a frozen sheet of canvas, and the wind took it like a sail. "Hold it!" he roared, and she grabbed the other end, her feet sliding on the ice. They fought the wind together, nailing it down. His hammer blows the only sound that could master the storm. He brought out the Winchester rifle, the one that leaned by the door. He set it on the table. "You know how to use this?" "No," she whispered. He laid out the cartridges, heavy and brass. He showed her the loading gate, how to work the lever. Click-clack. "It kicks. Hard. Settle it here," he said, tapping his own shoulder. "Don't just pull the trigger. Squeeze." "Why?" she asked, her hands trembling as she held the cold, heavy weapon. "What's out there?" "Right now? Nothing but wind," he said, staring out the window. "But the wolves will get hungry, and the storm will end. You need to know." He paused. "In case I'm not here." The words hit her. In case I'm not here. He was teaching her to survive without him. She began to see the man, not the shadow. She saw the quiet care in him. He always took the side of the cabin nearest the draft. He gave her the larger portion of the thin stew, claiming he was not hungry. He rewrapped his own hand with a piece of burlap, never mentioning the linen she had dropped. He was decent, beneath the ice, beneath the shame. There was a core of simple, hard decency. He was a man who had been taught he was nothing, and so he tried to be nothing. But his actions betrayed him. One night, the wind finally died. The silence it left behind was shocking. A vacuum. All they could hear was the snap and crackle of the fire. They had been silent for an hour. Clara sat on the hearth, mending her sock, her fingers stiff. Eli was on the floor, oiling a piece of tack, the leather dark in his hands. Clara had been twisting her wedding band, the thin gold ring from Thomas. She had been married for 5 years. 5 years of walking on eggshells. 5 years of learning to read the signs of a coming storm in her husband's eyes. He would drink. He would apologize. He would quote scripture. And then he would hit her. The debts had been his final, parting blow. A way to control her even from the grave. This marriage to Silas Mercer, this cold, transactional thing, had been her one. Desperate chance. A new life. A different prison. Maybe, but a bigger one. One with food. One without fists. And now, even that was gone. Silas was delayed. He had abandoned her to this frozen wasteland, to his savage son. The hopelessness of it, the sheer, endless, empty future, rose up and choked her. She pulled the ring from her finger. She had not been able to do it before. It was a sin. It was all she had left. She stared at the circle of gold in her palm. It meant nothing. It was a shackle. A sob broke from her. It was not a quiet sound. It was a raw, ugly tear in the fabric of the night. She dropped the ring. It hit the hearthstone with a tiny, metallic clink. She buried her face in her hands and wept. She wept for Thomas's cruelty, for Silas's indifference. She wept for the woman she had been, and the thing she had become, a piece of property, unclaimed, unwanted, lost. Eli went still. The rhythmic scrape of his work stopped. He did not speak. He did not move for a long time. Clara just cried, unable to stop, the dam of her grief finally broken. She felt more than heard, him move. He set the leather aside. He came and sat on the hearth, not next to her, a few feet away, close enough to be a presence, a solid, unmoving shape in the firelight. He just sat. He offered no words, no there, no pat on the back. He just offered his silence, and in that silence, she finally found the space to speak the truth. "He beat me," she whispered, the words tearing her throat. "My husband, Thomas, he was a good man. Everyone said pious, but he would drink, and he would hurt me." Eli did not look at her. He stared into the fire. "The debts," she continued, her voice gaining a frantic strength. "They were just the end of it. He left me with nothing. I had nowhere to go. My family, they were ashamed. This marriage," she choked on the word, "this bargain with your father. It was not a choice. It was the only way, my only way out, to be safe, to eat. She looked at him, her eyes burning.
And he's not even here. He left me. He just left me here to die.
Eli's face was carved from stone. The firelight played in the hard lines of his jaw, the deep shadow of his eyes.
He ain't coming. Clara.
His voice was low, rough as gravel.
I know,
she wept.
I know. He's in Marble Ridge. Or he doesn't care.
No, Eli said. He finally turned his head. His dark eyes locked on hers. They were empty of pity, full of a cold, hard truth. He's dead. The words hung in the air.
The fire crackled.
What?
He's dead,
Eli repeated, his voice flat. Died 2 days before your wagon came down the pass. Got drunk in Marble Ridge. Tried to break that new stallion. The horse didn't like it. Kicked him. Caved his chest in. He was dead before he hit the ground. Clara stared at him. The blood drained from her face. Dead. Not delayed. Not indifferent. Dead. The man she was sold to was dead before she had even arrived. The grief she felt was not for Silas. It was for herself. It was a wild, desperate grief for her lost hope. And then, right behind it, came the anger. A cold, sharp fury that burned away the tears. She rose to her feet.
2 days,
she whispered.
2 days. You've known this entire time, while I waited.
She looked at him, truly looked at him. The lies, the evasions, he's delayed. You let me sit here, she said, her voice rising, shaking. You let me wait like a fool. What was your plan? She was in front of him now. She shoved his shoulder. It was like shoving a stone wall. He did not even blink.
What was your plan, Eli?
She screamed, hitting his chest with her fists. The blows were weak, pathetic.
Huh? Just keep me here? Keep me like a stray dog you found in the snow?
Were you going to wait till spring and send me back? Or were you just going to keep me,
like he would have? Like his property?
The accusation hung in the cabin, ugly and sharp. Eli's face darkened. He stood up slowly, towering over her. His hands were clenched at his sides. For a second, she thought he might hit her. She saw the violence that lived under his skin. But he did not. He just looked at her, his eyes filled with a pain so deep she could not understand it. He looked ashamed. He did not answer her question. He could not. He just turned, grabbed his coat, and walked out of the cabin. He did not slam the door. He just left. He vanished into the cold, silent, white dark. This time, she went after him. She did not wait. The anger was gone, replaced by a new, sharp, and terrible understanding. She grabbed her own coat, plunged her bare feet into her frozen boots, and ran out the door.
Eli, she screamed into the night.
The world was vast and silver under a new, hard moon. The snow was packed and frozen. She saw his tracks, heading for the barn. She followed. The wind cut through her thin coat. She found him in the hayloft. The great loft door was open, and he was standing in the opening, staring out at the white, dead world. The moonlight hit his face.
You'll freeze,
she said, her voice a small puff of white air. She was shivering, but not from the cold.
It's all I've ever known,
he said, his voice dead.
This cold.
She climbed the ladder. She stood in the hay a few feet from him. The barn smelled of hay and horses and old leather.
Why?
She whispered.
Why didn't you tell me?
He did not turn. What would you have done? Where would you have gone? Back up the pass? You'd have been dead in an hour.
That was my choice.
Was it? He said, a bitter laugh in his voice. Was it your choice to marry Thomas? Was it your choice to come here? When have you ever had a choice? Clara. She had no answer for that. He turned from the moonlight. His face was in shadow. You asked me what my plan was. He said, I didn't have one. I've never had a plan. I just do the next thing. The snow fell. The wood needed chopping. The roof leaked. You were here. He stepped back from the edge, into the deep dark of the loft. "I should have told you. I didn't know how." He sat down on a hay bale, his head in his hands. Clara moved closer. She sat on the bale next to him, not touching, just near. "He raised me like a dog," Eli said, his voice muffled. "Silas, he wasn't my father. He was just the man." He told her. He told her everything. His voice was flat, emotionless, as if he were recounting someone else's story. He told her about his mother, a young Comanche girl, captured in a raid. "He didn't marry her," Eli said, the words sounding foreign. "He kept her in a line cabin, used her. I was born there." He told her how his mother died. When he was tired of her, he said, he just stopped bringing food. He let the winter take her. I was 5. I was in the cabin. I watched. He told her how Silas had brought him to the ranch, a living symbol of his sin, a secret to be hidden, and a thing to be beaten. How the other hands called him breed or savage or nothing at all. "So why did you stay?" Clara whispered, her heart aching. The cold was gone. There was just this terrible, hollow pain. "Why didn't you leave?" "I tried," he said. He looked up, and in the sliver of moonlight, she saw the faint, old scars on his face. "I tried twice. First time, I was maybe 16, got to Laramie, a group of men. They didn't like my face. They called me Injun and worse. They beat me for an hour. The sheriff found me. He threw me in a cell. Then he sent a wire to Silas. Silas wrote in and he paid the sheriff $10 for my return. The second time," he said, his voice hollow, "I just walked up into the high country. I thought, I'll just go, I'll live with the wolves. But I got up there, and I looked down, and I realized there's nowhere to go. The world out there. It's just a bigger version of this ranch. It's the same. Here at least I know the enemy. I know the cold." Clara wept. Silently. The tears froze on her cheeks. She wept for the 5-year-old boy, watching his mother starve. She wept for the 16-year-old, beaten and sold. She wept for the man in front of her, who believed the world had no place for him. She did not know what to say. There were no words. So she reached out, her hand, red and raw from the cold, found his was bare, calloused, and cold as ice. He flinched. His whole body went rigid. He was staring at her hand, on his like it was a snake. But he did not pull away. She held his hand. She laced her frozen fingers with his. They sat there, in the cold, silent barn. For a long, long time. They went back to the cabin. The fire was almost dead again. The main room was an icebox. Her little room, with its tiny stove, was no better. Eli built the fire up. He worked with a feverish energy, piling on the logs they had split, until it was a roaring blaze. But the cabin was too big. The cold was too deep. He looked at the fire. He looked at her, shivering in her coat. He looked at her bedroll, laid out in the corner. He walked to her room. She heard him. He came back with her mattress. It was thin, just a tick stuffed with straw, but it was something. He laid it on the floor, in front of the hearth, as close to the fire as he could get it. Then he went and got his own bedroll. He laid it next to hers, not touching, but close. "It's the only warm spot," he said, his voice gruff. It was not an invitation. It was a fact. She lay down. She did not undress. She just got under the thin blanket. He lay down on his roll, his back to her. The cabin was quiet. Only the roar of the fire and the howl of the wind, which had started up again. High and thin. She could feel him, the heat radiating from his body. She could hear him breathe. It was a deep, steady sound. In, out. Her own breathing was shallow, fast. She had never been this close to a man without fear. Thomas's closeness had always been a threat. Silas, a terrifying unknown. But Eli, she was not afraid of him.
Not anymore. She turned on her side, facing his back. A broad, solid wall. He was so still. Was he asleep? She thought about his mother, about his scars, about his hand in hers. A new feeling was rising in her. It was not just pity. It was not just gratitude. It was a kinship, a deep, aching need, a desire, not for pleasure, but for warmth, for contact, a need to prove, to herself and to him, that they were not ghosts, that they were alive. Her hand was trembling. She lifted it. She reached out across the small, cold gap between them. She did not touch his back. She laid her fingers, lightly, on his chest, on the rough wool of his shirt. He stopped breathing. His whole body went rigid. He was awake. He was so terribly, terribly awake. For a full minute, the world stopped. There was only the fire, the wind, and her hand on his chest. Then his hand came up. It was calloused, hard. It covered hers. But he did not hold it. He did not lace his fingers. He stopped it. He pressed it, gently but firmly, away from his body. He turned his head, looking at her over his shoulder. His face was a mask of torment in the firelight. His dark eyes, they were not angry, they were terrified. "You don't owe me nothing, Clara," he whispered, his voice a raw rasp. "Not for the food, not for the roof, not for him." He thought this was a payment. He thought she was offering herself like his mother, because he was a man, and she was a woman, and she owed him. She looked at him. She saw the deep lifetime of shame, the belief that he was not a man to be wanted, only a thing to be used or paid. Her fear was gone. Her tears were gone. There was only a sharp, sudden, burning clarity. "I know," she whispered. She leaned forward. He did not move. He was frozen, waiting. She kissed him. She pressed her cold lips to his. It was clumsy. It was desperate. It was salty from the tears that had frozen on her face. It was not a kiss of passion. It was a kiss that said, "I see you. You are not a ghost. I am not a debt." He was stone. He was ice. She pulled back, shame washing over her again. A terrible mistake. But just as she moved, his hand, the one that had pushed hers away, came up. It was not gentle. It was rough, desperate. His fingers tangled in her hair, gripping her head. He pulled her back, and he kissed her. It was not a kiss. It was the storm. It was all the cold, all the silence, all the rage of his entire life. Breaking, it was hunger. It was desperation. It was a drowning man taking his first breath. He kissed her like he was dying, and she was the only air left in the world. That kiss broke the world. It broke the cold. It broke the silence. It was not a gentle thing. It was a starving thing. When he pulled her back, his hand tangled in her hair, his mouth crushing hers. It was all the pain and loneliness and rage of his life pouring out. And she met him. She met him with all her own fear, her own grief, her own desperate, aching need to be held. They ended up in her narrow room, on her narrow cot. It was not about love. It was not about sweetness. It was about heat. It was two half-frozen animals, two ghosts, proving to each other, in the most desperate way, that they were still alive. They clung to each other in the dark, a tangle of limbs and rough blankets, and for the first time since the snow had begun, neither of them was cold. Their secret affair began, but there was no one to keep it secret from. The blizzard had sealed them in. Riggs and Pete, the other ranch hands, were gone, either holed up in a line cabin or buried in a drift. The valley belonged to Clara and Eli. The storm, after that night, finally wore itself out. It just stopped. One morning they woke, and the wind was not screaming. The silence was so big it was louder than the storm had been. When Eli opened the door, the world was a blinding, clean, blue and white. The snow was packed 10 feet deep in the yard.
drifted clear to the eaves of the barn. They had to dig their way out, and the work began. But it was different now. Everything was different. He would teach her things, but his voice was no longer flat and cold. When he showed her how to reset a snare for snow rabbits, his hands would cover hers to guide the wire, and his fingers would linger. When she missed a shot with the rifle at a circling hawk, he did not criticize. He just steadied her arm, his body warm against her back. "Breathe out," he'd murmur, his breath warm on her ear. "Just let the world stop." They cooked together. She found a sack of withered potatoes and onions in the root cellar and made a thick stew. He watched her, a look of strange wonder on his face, as if she were performing magic. "My mother, she just cooked meat over the fire," he said, his voice quiet. "This is better," Clara said, stirring. "It lasts longer." He would sit by the fire at night, mending a bridle, and he would talk. He told her stories, not of his pain, but of the land. He told her how the mountains got their names. He told her how to read the clouds. He told her about a time he'd seen a mountain lion take down a full-grown buck. And she, in turn, told him about Pennsylvania, about green, rolling hills and rivers that did not freeze solid, and trees so thick you could not see the sky. She told him about her father, who had been a kind man, and her mother, who smelled of baking bread. Each day was a small, stolen piece of life. They fixed the corral fence where the snow's weight had snapped the rails. They cleared the roofs. They stacked wood. They were a team, a man and a woman, building a life. But underneath every moment of shared laughter, under every quiet touch, lay the truth. This was not real. It was a bubble created by a storm. The thaw was coming. And with the thaw, the world. Each moment was tender. Each moment was doomed. One afternoon, Eli rode out. He said he had to check the line cabin on the South Ridge to see if Riggs and Pete were still alive, or if the cattle there had all frozen. The silence of the cabin, which had once been a comfort, now felt empty. He was gone, and she was alone. She found herself restless. She needed to clean, to put things right. She went to the big, cold, dark room that had belonged to Silas Mercer. The room had been locked, but Eli had opened it the day before, looking for bullets. It was a dead man's room. It smelled of stale cigar smoke, old leather, and sour whiskey. A massive, unmade bed, a heavy wardrobe, and a huge, dark desk. A thick, leather-bound ledger sat on top. She ran her fingers over the cover. She was not a snoop, but she needed to know. She needed to know the man she had been sold to. She opened it. It was not just a ranch ledger. It was not just cattle tallies. It was a book of debts. Line after line, page after page. Names of settlers, homesteaders, families passing through. Silas Mercer had not been a rancher. He had been a predator. He had loaned money, seed, food, and tools, and when the harsh land beat them, when the crops failed or the cattle died, he had collected. Hiram Scott, one line read, "Debt, $50. Paid. Deed to South 40 acreage." Amos Fry, "Debt, $20. Paid. 2 breeding mares, 1 wagon." Gideon Black, "Debt, $80. Paid. 10 years bonded labor." Her blood ran cold. This man had owned people. He had built his empire on the failures of desperate families. She was about to close the book, sickened, when she found a tin box tucked in the back of a deep drawer. It was full of letters. Most were dry, business dealings, but one was different. The paper was old, the ink faded, the handwriting delicate. Female. It was not dated, but it looked to be 20 years old. "Silas," it read, "you cannot. He is your blood, too. He is your son. I will not have him sold for what my brother owed you. It is a sin before God. You cannot take my baby." It was not signed, just a... Clara's hand trembled. She read it again. "Sold for what my brother owed you."
Another one. Not Eli's mother. Another woman. Another child. A baby. Sold for a debt. A half-sibling. Somewhere. Sold. She heard the crunch of snow outside. The dogs were barking. Eli was back. She folded the letter, her hands shaking. She tucked it deep into the bodice of her dress. She put the tin box back. She closed the ledger. This was a poison. This was a weight he did not need, on top of all the others. She would hide it. For now. For him. She was in the main room, stirring the fire. When he came in, he was covered in snow, his face grim.
"They're gone," he said. "Riggs and Pete. The cabin's empty. They must have tried to ride out."
"Oh, Eli," she whispered.
"They didn't make it," he said, his voice flat. "Found the horses 1/2 mile from the pass. Wolves got 'em."
He looked at her. "It's just us now. For real."
The thaw came 2 days later. It came fast. The sun came out. A pale, weak thing at first, then stronger. The snow began to drip. The world turned to mud and slush. And with the thaw came a rider. They heard the horses first. Eli was on the porch, fixing a harness. Clara was just inside, sweeping. A big man on a big horse rode into the yard. He was red-faced, wrapped in a massive buffalo coat, and he had a rifle in a scabbard that looked as well used as he did. He reined in, his horse churning the brown slush.
"Silas!"
he bellowed, his voice a bull's roar.
"Silas Mercer, you old goat! You in there!"
Eli stood up. He did not move fast. He just rose. He stood at the edge of the porch, his hands loose at his sides. Clara stepped into the doorway, her heart a cold, sudden knot. The bubble had burst. The man's eyes widened. "Well, paint me blue and call me Sunday." He swung down from his horse, his boots sinking deep in the mud. "Eli." He looked around. "What in hell are you doing on the main porch? Where's your PA?" "He's not here. Dobbins," Eli said. His voice was perfectly level. Dobbins' gaze slid past Eli and landed on Clara. His eyes were small, and they raked over her, slow and greasy. A grin split his chapped face. "Ah," he said, as if he'd just put 2 and 2 together. "I heard the bride, the little widow from back east." He chuckled, a wet, ugly sound. "So, the old man's not here." He looked from Clara back to Eli. "And you're, what, keeping the place warm?" "State your business, Dobbins." Eli said. "My business is with Silas. We had a deal." Dobbins looked around the yard. At the empty bunkhouse. "Place looks dead, just you and her." He leered at Clara again. "You sure move fast, boy. Pa ain't even cold, and you're already filling his shoes." He took a step closer. "And his bed, I'd wager. Get off this land." Eli said. It was not loud, but the air around him turned to ice. Dobbins laughed. He stepped right up to the porch, so he was looking up at Eli. "Or what? You gonna scalp me? Breed? I never understood why Silas kept you. You ain't white enough to run the place, and you ain't Injun enough to track." He spat a stream of brown tobacco juice. It landed near Eli's boot. "You're just nothing." Clara saw it. It was not a choice. It was a reflex. Eli's body coiled. The man who had held her hand, the man who had breathed out, let the world stop. He was gone. In his place was a thing of pure, cold violence. His hand did not go to his gun. He was just going to break him. Clara moved. She stepped out, her hand landing on Eli's arm. The muscle beneath her fingers was like banded steel. "Please," she said, her voice shaking, looking at Dobbins. "We don't want any trouble. Mr. Mercer, he's been gone. We've been trapped by the storm." Dobbins looked at her hand on Eli's arm. His eyes narrowed to slits. The leering grin was gone, replaced by a cold, calculating look. "I see," he said. "It's like that." He backed up a step, his hand now resting on the butt of his own pistol. "Well, this changes things. He mounted his horse. "This ain't over, boy," he said, staring at Eli. "Folks in Marble Ridge, they're gonna have questions, big questions, about where Silas Mercer, a rich man, has gone, and what his bastard son is doing living in the main house with his intended bride." He turned his horse. "Won't be long 'fore folk ask. Won't be long 'fore I come back with 'em." He dug his spurs in and galloped away, sending a spray of muddy slush against the porch. The yard was silent. The only sound was the drip, drip, drip of the melting snow. The world was coming for them. Clara turned to Eli. She was trembling. "He's right," she said, her voice frantic. "He'll be back. Eli, they will hang you. They will say you killed him. For the ranch. For me." Eli just stood there, staring at the muddy track Dobbins had left. "He might. He will. We have to leave. Tonight. We can pack food. We can take the horses. We can go north, through the pass. They'll never find us." Eli turned and walked back into the cabin. He went to the fire and stood with his back to her. "No." "No?" She followed him, her voice rising. "Eli, they will hang you. You heard what he called you. They won't give you a trial. They won't ask questions. They'll see your face, and they'll see me, and they'll tear you to pieces. It's what he wants."
"And where do we go? Clara?"
he said, his voice hard as the frozen ground. "West, Oregon? You think it's different there? You think my face changes? You think Dobbins is the only man like him? We can change our names. We can say we're married." "I tried running," he said, turning to her, his face a mask of old pain. "I told you, there's nowhere to go. He swept his arm, taking in the dark, smoky cabin. "This is all I have. It's tainted. It's built on my mother's blood. But it's mine. I will not be run off my own land by a man like that." "So you'll stay here and die?" she cried, tears of pure, hot frustration in her eyes. "That's your plan, to let him win." He stepped toward her. He gripped her shoulders, his fingers digging in. "If I die here, on my feet, not in a ditch in some town that hates me." He looked at her, his eyes dark and full of a terrible finality. He pulled her to him and kissed her. It was not the desperate kiss of the storm. It was not the tender kiss of the morning. This was hard, rough, and full of goodbye. It tasted of salt and ash. He let her go. He looked broken, defeated. She saw his resolve, and she saw the truth. He would not run from Dobbins. He would not run from the land, but maybe, just maybe, he would run with her. "Then I'm not asking you to run," she whispered, putting her hands on his chest. "I'm not asking you to run from this. I'm asking you to come with me, to go to something, a new place, with me." He stared down at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He saw no pity. He saw no fear. He just saw her.
"He said it,"
Eli said, his voice thick.
"My PA ain't even cold, and I'm with his bride."
"I am not his bride," Clara said, her voice a sudden, fierce whip crack. "I was his property, just like you were. We're the same, Eli. We're the two things Silas Mercer owned and broke. Don't let him win. Don't let him keep you here in his shadow until you die." He looked at her, and the hard, fatalistic line of his mouth, it just crumpled. "If we go," he said, his voice low, "we burn it all, the past, everything. You give up what you came for." "I didn't come for a ranch," she said. "I came to be free." She looked at him. "I'm only free with you." He looked at her for a long moment. Then, a slow nod. "Tonight," he said, "we ride north." That night, they did not pack, not at first. They built up the fire, a roaring blaze. Clara went to her room. She came back with a marriage contract. The paper that had sold her, she unfolded it, looked at the cold, legal words one last time. Clara Bellows, to Silas Mercer, in consideration of debts paid. She handed it to Eli. He took it. He read it. His jaw tightened. He tossed it into the fire. The paper blackened, curled, and flared into a bright orange flame. Now his, Eli said. He went to Silas's room. He came back with the tin box of letters and the heavy, leather-bound ledger. He did not open them. He did not read a word. He just upended the box. He threw the letters in, handful by handful. Clara watched as the letter, the one about the baby, fell from her dress, where she'd hidden it. She had forgotten it was there. It fluttered onto the hearth. Eli stopped. He looked at it. He looked at her. She picked it up. Another one. She whispered, "Like you, a baby, sold." He took it from her. He read it. His face became nothing, a mask of stone. He looked at the fire. Then he looked at her. "The past," he said. He tossed the letter in. They watched it burn. They watched the proof of his father's crimes, the last trace of a lost brother or sister, turn to ash. Then he threw the ledger on top. The heavy book hissed and smoked, but it would not catch. Eli grabbed the poker and jammed it into the fire, forcing the pages open to the flames. They stood there, side by side, and watched it all burn. The proof of her sale, the proof of his father's sins. It was all just smoke. They were packing just as the sky began to turn from black to a bruised, watery gray. Dried meat, bullets, 2 bedrolls, a sack of oats for the horses. They would take the 2 fastest horses from the stable and ride north, into the high passes, before Dobbins could even gather his men. Crack! The sound was like thunder. The window above the kitchen sink exploded, showering the room in glass and ice. "Down!" Eli roared. He tackled Clara, pulling her behind the massive oak table just as a second shot splintered the wood where she had been standing. He already had the Winchester in his hand. "Eli Mercer." The voice was Dobbins, amplified by the cold, clear air. "Come out with your hands high. We know you did it." "Did what?" Eli shouted back, his voice low, his eyes scanning the yard. "Murder! You killed your PA to take his land, and you kidnapped his woman. We got a witness." "He's lying," Clara screamed from the floor. "He won't just wait," Eli whispered, his face grim. He was checking the load in the rifle. "He'll burn us out." "No," Clara said, crawling to him. "No, Eli, don't fight. There's too many." She could hear the horses, the jingle of tack, the low mumble of voices. At least 5 or 6 men. "If you fight, they'll kill you. It's what he wants. He wants to say you fought back." "They'll kill me anyway," Eli said, his voice flat. "No," she said, grabbing his face, forcing him to look at her. "No, not if I'm with you, not if I tell them. They won't hang you if the kidnapped woman says she's free." "Clara, they won't." "Mercer, we're coming in," a voice shouted. "No, wait!" Clara scrambled to her feet. She ran to the door. "Clara, no!" Eli shouted, lunging for her. She flung the door open. The gray dawn flooded in. She stood on the porch, her hands raised, her hair wild around her face. Dobbins was on his horse, 10 yards away, his rifle leveled at her heart. 4 other men were with him, fanned out, their guns all pointing at the door. "See?" Dobbins yelled, a look of triumph on his face. "He had her prisoner. Ma'am, you're safe now. Get away from the door. We'll handle this animal." "I am not his prisoner!" Clara yelled, her voice breaking, but strong. "He didn't kill anyone. Silas Mercer is dead. He was kicked by a horse weeks ago." "He's got her spooked," Dobbins said to his men, not looking at her. "Got her confused. She don't know what she's saying." Eli appeared behind Clara. He stood in the doorway. He had set the rifle down. His hands were empty, open at his sides. "I'm coming out," Eli said, his voice clear. "She has nothing to do with this." "Good boy." Dobbins sneered. "Now drop the gun belt. Slow." Eli unbuckled his belt. The heavy Colt pistol and its cartridge belt thudded onto the porch boards. "Now walk out, hands on your head." Eli stepped past Clara, onto the porch. As soon as his boots touched the muddy snow, two of the men rushed him. They didn't just arrest him. They hit him, slamming him face first into the slush, wrenching his arms behind his back. They bound his hands with a pigging string, tight enough to cut. "No!" Clara screamed, running to him. Dobbins dismounted and shoved her back, hard. She fell onto the porch. "You stay out of it, ma'am. You're overwrought. This thing, he got in your head." "He didn't do anything," she cried, scrambling up. "We're taking him to Marble Ridge," Dobbins said, ignoring her. He yanked Eli to his feet by his hair. Eli's lip was split, and blood was dripping onto the white snow. He looked at Clara, and his eyes were dead, empty. "Get a rope on him," Dobbins said. "We'll tie him to the saddle horn." "You can't!" Clara shrieked. "He's not an animal!" "He'll get a trial, ma'am," one of the other men said. He looked younger, unsure. "We're just bringing him in to the sheriff." They dragged Eli to his own horse, threw him over the saddle, and tied his feet together beneath the horse's belly. They rode out, leading Eli's horse like a pack mule. Clara stood in the yard, in the freezing dawn, and watched them go. The snow was stained with his blood. She did not wait. She did not cry. She ran back into the cabin, grabbed her coat, her boots, and the last of the bread. She ran to the barn, saddled the mare herself, her fingers numb and clumsy on the buckles. She mounted. She did not look back at the cabin. She kicked the horse into a desperate run, following the muddy, churned-up tracks toward the town of Marble Ridge. Marble Ridge was not a town. It was a wound. It was 2 rows of muddy, rutted street, lined with false front buildings that leaned against each other like tired drunks. There was a general store, a blacksmith, a land office, and 4 saloons. The law was a small, pine-board building with the word sheriff painted crookedly above the door, and next to it, a squat, windowless box made of stone and iron, the jail. Clara rode in on the exhausted mare, her body numb, her heart a cold, hard knot. The men who had taken Eli were already there. Their horses were tied in front of the Gold Nugget Saloon, and she could hear their loud voices and Dobbins' booming laugh from inside. She slid off her horse, her legs almost buckled. She tied the mare to the rail, her hands shaking so badly she could barely work the knot. Men on the boardwalk stopped to stare at her. They were rough men, trappers and miners and ranch hands, their faces hard and bearded. They looked at her like she was a stray deer, something to be run down. Her fine, Eastern clothes were torn and mud-stained. Her hair was a wild tangle. She ignored them. She walked straight to the sheriff's office. A man sat inside, his boots on the desk, a tin cup of coffee in his hand. He was thin, with a weasel-like face and a stained mustache. A tin star was pinned to his vest. "Sheriff," she said, her voice dry. He looked up, not moving his feet. "Ma'am." "The men," she said. "The ones who just rode in. They arrested a man, Eli Mercer, from the Mercer Ranch." "I know it," the sheriff said, taking a slow sip. "Dobbins and his boys brought him in. Good work, too. Took some sand, going after a killer like that." "A killer?" Clara's voice rose. "He is not a killer. His father, Silas Mercer, died from a horse kick. It was an accident. I was there. I saw it." She was lying, but the words came out, desperate. The sheriff finally put his boots on the floor. He leaned forward. "Now, ma'am, we got a different story. Dobbins says the man's been dead for weeks, murdered, and Dobbins says he found you held captive, that this half-breed forced you. You can understand, a woman alone. You don't have to be scared of him no more. You're safe." "I was never scared of him," she cried. "I was scared of the storm. He saved my life. He is innocent." The sheriff sighed. Like she was a child, he had to humor. "Ma'am, Dobbins is a landowner, a respected man in this territory. Eli Mercer. Well, everyone knows what Eli Mercer is. He's Silas's dark secret, a violent, unpredictable. He is a good man.
The sheriff stood up. His eyes turned hard. Ma'am, I think you're overwrought. Dobbins paid for a room for you at the inn. He pointed across the street. You should go there. Clean up, rest. We'll handle this.
Handle this? You mean you'll hang him?
He'll get a trial, the sheriff said, his voice flat.
When?
When the judge gets here. Could be a week, could be a month. Now, you go on. This is men's business. She had been dismissed. She was a woman. She was hysterical. She was nothing. She turned, her body shaking with a rage so cold it felt like ice water. She walked to the jail. It was just a small stone hut attached to the office. A single, barred door. She walked to it.
Eli?
She whispered, her hand on the cold iron. A shadow moved behind the bars.
Clara!
His voice was a low rasp. She peered into the darkness. She could just make him out. He was standing, his face a mess of cuts and bruises. His lip was split wide open, and one eye was swollen shut. They had not just jailed him, they had beaten him.
Oh, God,
she whispered, her fingers curling around the bars.
Eli.
You shouldn't be here, he choked out. Go, just get on your horse and ride. Ride east. Don't stop.
I am not leaving you.
Clara, listen to me, he said, his voice urgent, desperate. He pressed his face closer to the bars. These men, Dobbins, he's not just, he wants me dead, he wants the ranch. If you stay, if you're with me, they'll say you're like me. They'll ruin you, or worse. You have to go.
No, I will not.
You have to, he begged, his voice breaking.
Don't waste yourself on me. Clara, I'm nothing. I told you, I'm just the breed. I'm not worth this. I'm not worth you.
The tears she had refused to shed finally came, hot and blinding. She pressed her forehead against the cold, filthy iron.
You are not nothing,
she whispered, her voice thick.
Do you hear me? You are not small.
He went still.
That night,
she said, her voice shaking.
When I was so foolish. When I said, too small. I was just a nervous, stupid girl.
She looked up, meeting his one good eye through the shadows.
You were never too small, Eli, she whispered. You filled every empty part of me. You filled that whole, cold, empty valley. You are the only real thing I have found in this whole, dead land.
He let out a sound, a choked sob, and his hand, raw and bruised, came through the bars. He could not reach her face. His fingers splayed open in the air. She covered his hand with hers, pressing his palm against the iron. They stood there, weeping, separated by a wall of stone. I will get you out, she said, her voice hard.
I promise you, I will find a way.
She heard footsteps. The sheriff was coming out of his office. Ma'am, I told you to leave. She let go of Eli's hand. She turned to the sheriff, her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were not weak. They were burning.
He needs food. He needs water. He needs a doctor.
He'll get what a prisoner gets, the sheriff said, pulling her arm. Now, come on. He dragged her away from the jail. That night, the town of Marble Ridge showed its true face. The word had spread. The saloons were full, and the talk was loud. It was not just talk. It was a poison. The Indian bastard murdered his own PA, took that white woman for himself, defiled her. Clara sat in the small, cold room at the inn. She had a piece of bread and a tin of water from the innkeeper. She waited until the sounds from the saloon across the street were at their loudest. Then, clutching the bread and water, she slipped out the back. She moved through the shadows, down the alley. She reached the jail.
Eli,
she whispered. She heard a groan. He was on the floor. I have bread, she said, and water.
She pushed the bread through the bars, piece by piece. She saw his hand, dark and shaking. Retrieve it. She pushed the tin cup through. She heard him drink, a desperate, gasping sound.
Clara,
He rasped.
you have to go. They're outside the inn. I heard them. Dobbins. He's telling them about you. He's telling them you wanted it. That you're a...
I don't care what he says, she hissed, her back against the cold stone.
You don't understand, he said. They'll come for you.
Let them, she said. She stayed until she was sure he had finished the bread. I will be back tomorrow, she said. She slipped back into the alley. She was almost to the inn's back door when she heard them. There she is. 3 men. They stumbled out of the shadows, blocking her path. They smelled of whiskey and hate. It was not Dobbins. It was just townsmen, men who had drunk Dobbins' poison.
Well, looky here.
One of them slurred. He was a big man with a greasy beard.
It's the Injun's woman. Come for a taste of a real man.
Clara froze. There was nowhere to run. Leave me alone, she said, her voice trembling, but loud. Oh, she's got fire. The second one laughed. I like fire. The big one stepped toward her. He grabbed her arm. His grip was like a vice. What's the matter, girlie? We ain't good enough for you? You only like the red ones? He yanked her toward him, his other hand fumbling for her dress. Clara screamed. She clawed at his face, her nails digging in. He roared and backhanded her. She fell against the wall, her head striking the wood. The world spun. That's it, you... I believe, a new voice said. The lady told you to leave her alone. The voice was deep. It was calm. It was not Eli. The men turned. Out of the darkness of the smithy's stable, a man emerged. He was tall. He was black. He was, Clara thought, the biggest man she had ever seen. His shoulders as wide as the alley. He was not wearing a coat, just his shirt sleeves, rolled up over forearms corded with muscle. He was holding a farrier's rasp, a long, heavy, file-like tool. He held it like it was a feather. The man holding Clara let her go. He stared.
Who in hell are you, boy?
The big man spat. I'm Jonas. The big man said. His voice was like low thunder. And you're on my side of the street. Now, apologize to the lady. And go. Apologize? The man laughed, but it was a nervous sound. To him and her? She's the breed's whore. Jonas moved. He was not fast. He was just inevitable. He took one step. He did not raise the rasp. He just reached out his massive hand and grabbed the man's throat. He lifted him. The man's feet left the ground. He just held him against the wall, his heels kicking in the mud.
I ain't gonna ask again,
Jonas said, his voice a low growl. The other 2 men did not move. They were frozen. The man in Jonas's grip was turning blue, his eyes wide, clawing at the massive wrist.
Jonas!
Clara cried.
Don't! You'll kill him!
Jonas looked at her. He held the man for 1 second longer. Then he opened his hand. The man fell to the ground in a heap, gasping and choking.
Get him out of here,
Jonas said to the other 2. They did not need to be told twice. They grabbed their friend and half dragged, half ran him down the alley, disappearing into the night. Jonas turned to Clara. He dropped the rasp, the heavy clang echoing in the alley. His face, in the moonlight, was not angry. It was just sad. You all right, ma'am? He asked. Yes, she whispered, pulling her torn dress together. Thank you. You are Jonas. Yes, ma'am. I knew Eli. A long time ago. I used to work for Silas. He looked down the alley. Left when I couldn't stomach the old man no more. You're his friend, she asked. Hope for the first time. A small, tiny spark. I guess I am, Jonas said. I heard what Dobbins was saying in the saloon. I figured someone ought to be watching out for you. Eli. He never had no one.
They're going to hang him, Clara said, the words a raw wound. They're saying he killed Silas, but he didn't. Dobbins is lying.
Jonas nodded, his face grim. Dobbins has been wanting that Mercer land since the day he got here. And he's got the sheriff in his pocket. He's got the judge in his pocket, too. The judge? Judge Holloway. He comes through, but he and Dobbins, they own the land office together. They're partners.
Clara's hope died.
Then there's no hope.
Jonas looked at her. There's hope, but it ain't clean. You can't fight Dobbins with the law. He is the law here. You gotta fight him with something else.
With what? With the truth,
Jonas said. But not the easy truth, the dirty truth, the kind of truth that makes men like Dobbins nervous. He took her to his smithy. It was warm, the forge still glowing with low embers. He gave her a dipper of water.
We need proof,
she said. But we burned it. The letters, the ledger, Eli and I. We burned it all. Proof of Silas's crimes.
You burned it all? Jonas asked.
Clara stopped. Her hand went to her dress, to the small, secret pocket sewn inside the lining of her bodice, the pocket her mother had made, for coin. She had been so sure the letter had fallen out. In the firelight, in the panic, she had seen a letter fall. She had assumed it was the one. But what if it was not? Her fingers fumbled with the cloth. She pulled it out, a single, folded, creased piece of paper. The letter, the one from the woman. You cannot take my baby. He is your son. She had not burned it. In her fear and her haste, she had been wrong. It had been safe, tucked against her heart, the entire time. She opened it. She read it aloud to Jonas.
His eyes widened. A baby sold for a debt, Silas's own son.
It's proof, Clara said, her voice shaking. It's proof of what kind of man Silas was. It's something.
It's something, Jonas agreed.
But it's just a letter. Dobbins will say you wrote it. He'll say Eli made you. Then we need more. Clara said the fear was gone. The grief was gone. There was only a cold, hard purpose. You said you knew Eli. You knew his mother? Jonas's face darkened. I saw her, once or twice. Long time ago. Silas. He kept her hidden, up in a line cabin, like she was an animal. They say she was just a camp girl, a savage. She was a woman, Jonas said, his voice low. Just a young woman, scared, always scared. Eli said Silas, he took her, during a raid. That's the story Silas told. Jonas said, but there was another story, one I heard from old preacher Davies. He don't come to town much no more, lives up in the hills, a hermit mostly. Folks say he's crazy. What story? Clara pressed. That Silas, he didn't just take her, that he married her, that he forced Davies to do it, under duress, so that the baby, Eli would have his name, but it was a secret, a shameful secret. He was married to a Comanche girl. Clara stood up. Where is he, this preacher? Clara, he's up in the high country. It's a 2-day ride, and he's old. He might not even remember. Take me, she said. I can't leave. They'd know. Dobbins, his men. They're watching me, too. They don't like me being here, even without this. But I can draw you a map. He did, on a piece of scrap leather. He scratched the creeks, the ridges, the one broken-down church where the old preacher lived. You can't go alone, he said. I won't be, she said. I'll be going to get justice. But first, she had to try the law. She had to. The next morning, she took the letter. She marched back to the sheriff's office. Dobbins was there, and so was a new man, a man in a clean black suit with a cold, gray face and thin lips. Judge Holloway. This is her, Judge. Dobbins was saying. The poor woman, confused, traumatized by what that animal did to her. "I am not confused," Clara said. "Walking in." The sheriff grabbed her arm. She shook him off. She walked to the desk and slapped the letter down in front of the judge. "My name is Clara Bellows. I am not a victim. I am a witness. Eli Mercer is innocent. Silas Mercer died in an accident. And this is the kind of man Silas Mercer was. A man who sold his own children. A man who extorted and stole from every settler in this valley. Dobbins isn't here for justice. He's here for land." The judge read the letter. His thin lips did not move. His eyes were cold as a snake's. Dobbins read it over his shoulder, his face turning purple. "This is a forgery," Dobbins roared. "She wrote it. The breed's whore, trying to save her lover." The judge looked at Clara. He did not ask her a question. He just looked at her with a deep, bored, profound contempt. He picked up the letter. He struck a match from the box on his desk. He lit the corner of the paper. Clara gasped, "No!" She lunged for it, but the sheriff held her back. They all watched. The judge held the letter as it burned. The names, the sin, the proof. It turned black, curled, and dropped as ash into the spittoon by his desk. There was no letter. The judge said, his voice flat. He blew out the match. "As you were saying, Mr. Dobbins, the prisoner is unstable. A danger." "What about a trial?" the sheriff asked, his eyes gleaming. "A trial?" the judge said, looking at Clara. "It seems unnecessary. A waste of the territory's time. A public confession would be cleaner." "A confession?" Clara whispered, horrified. "Sheriff," the judge said, "perhaps you can persuade the prisoner to see the wisdom of clearing his conscience before he meets his maker." "I'll see to it." "Judge," the sheriff said, grinning. They were going to beat a confession out of him. They were not even going to give him a trial. They were just going to hang him. Clara was thrown back into the street. The door slammed. She stood in the mud, her breath gone. Her last, small hope burned to ash. She had one chance left, a 2-day ride, a crazy man in the mountains. She ran for the livery, but she did not just run. She stopped in the middle of the street. The town was watching. Men on the boardwalks, women peering from behind curtains. She turned. She marched back to the sheriff's office. She did not knock. She kicked the door open. Dobbins, the sheriff, and the judge all looked up, stunned. "You will not," she yelled, her voice ringing across the street. "You will not beat him, and you will not hang him without a trial." "Ma'am, you are in contempt," the judge sputtered. "And you are murderers," she shouted, pointing at all three of them. "You are thieves and murderers, and this whole town is watching you." She pointed out the door. "You all hear me? They are going to murder an innocent man. They burned the proof. They won't give him a trial. Is that the law in Marble Ridge?" People were gathering, in the street, on the boardwalks. They were grumbling, whispering. "He's a breed," someone muttered. "Still a trial," another said. "Burn the proof. What proof?" Dobbins always did want that land. The sheriff looked at the judge. The judge looked at Dobbins. They were not used to being shouted at. They were not used to being seen. "Sheriff," the judge said, his voice now high and thin. "It seems a public trial might be necessary to quiet the rabble." Dobbins looked furious. "But, Judge!" "A trial?" the judge said, his eyes on Clara, full of hate. "A quick one. Tomorrow, we'll give her show, and then we'll hang him." Clara stood, breathing hard, her heart hammering. She had won. She had won a day. The trial was not held in a building of law. There was no such thing in Marble Ridge. Judge Holloway convened his court in the Gold Nugget Saloon. They had cleared the card tables. The judge sat behind the bar, the rows of whiskey bottles his backdrop. The sheriff, his face still red from Clara's shouting, stood beside him, acting as bailiff. The entire room, the whole saloon was packed, shoulder to shoulder, with every miner, rancher, and trapper within 10 miles. It was a sea of greasy coats, bearded faces, and the stink of unwashed bodies and sour hate. Clara stood against the back wall. She had washed her face, but her dress was still torn, her hands still raw. Jonas stood beside her, a great, dark, silent mountain of a man. His presence was the only reason she was not being touched. They dragged Eli in. He was shackled at the wrists and ankles. The chains were short, forcing him to shuffle. The beating the sheriff had promised had been delivered. His left eye was a swollen, purple slit. His lip was split open again, and his shirt was stiff with dried blood. But as they shoved him into a chair facing the judge, he raised his head. He searched the crowd. His one good eye found Clara. He did not look defeated. He did not look scared. He just looked at her. And in that look, he poured every last thing he was. His thanks, his apology, his terror, and his love. "This court is in session," Judge Holloway said, his voice sharp. He banged a whiskey bottle on the bar like a gavel. "The territory versus Eli Mercer. The charge is murder and kidnapping." He pointed a thin finger at Dobbins. "Mr. Dobbins, you will testify." Dobbins swaggered to the front. He put his hand on the saloon's filthy Bible. He did not look at Eli. He looked at the crowd. He was playing to them. "I swear it," he boomed. He told his story. It was a masterpiece of lies. He said he had ridden to the Mercer Ranch on a friendly call. He said he had found the place a wreck. "And then," Dobbins said, his voice dropping, "I found Silas, or what was left of him, in the tack room, half buried under some tarps. Been dead must have been weeks. His head was caved in by a shovel. A shovel I found covered in blood." The crowd murmured, a low, ugly growl. "And where?" the judge asked, his voice smooth. "Was the prisoner?" "He was in the main house," Dobbins said, "living like a king. And he had the woman, poor thing, Miss Bellows." He pointed at Clara. "Locked in a room, crazed with fear. He had used her." A roar of disgust went through the room. Men spat on the floor. "The animal!" one shouted. "And when I confronted him," Dobbins said, "he confessed. He laughed about it. Said the old man had it coming. Said the land was his now. And so was the woman." "He is lying!" Clara screamed from the back. "Silence!" the judge roared. "Ms. Bellows, you will have your turn, and I warn you, perjury is a hanging offense." Dobbins finished. He said Eli had confessed on the ride in, bragging to the other men, proud of what he had done. He stepped down, a look of smug, false piety on his face. "Clara Bellows," the judge called. The crowd parted for her. It was like wading through a river of hate. She could hear them muttering, "Injun's whore. Liar. Look at her. She liked it." She stood in front of the bar. She refused to touch the Bible. "My name is Clara Bellows," she said, her voice shaking but loud. "And that man is a liar." She pointed at Dobbins. "Silas Mercer," she said, "died 2 days before I arrived. He was kicked by a horse, just as Eli said. He was drunk. Eli buried him. The storm hit. He gave me shelter. He gave me food. He protected me." "Protected you?" the judge sneered. "Ma'am, we have 6 men who say they found you in his possession." "I was not in his possession," she cried, her face burning. "I was with him, by choice. The storm. It trapped us. We were just surviving." "Surviving?" Dobbins laughed from his seat. "Is that what you call it, sleeping in a breed's bed?" "You will be silent," the judge snapped at Dobbins, pretending at fairness. He turned his cold eyes back to Clara. "Ma'am, you are the intended bride of Silas Mercer, a decent, Christian woman, and you stand here,
And you tell this court that you willingly consorted with him? He was giving her a chance to save herself, to be the victim, to say she was forced. All she had to do was lie. All she had to do was condemn Eli to save her own name. She looked at Eli. He was watching her, his one good eye wide. He was begging her. Save yourself. Lie. Let me go. She turned back to the judge. He is not a thing. He is a man, and he is a better man than anyone in this room. He is innocent. Then you are a liar, the judge said, his voice flat. Or you are a woman of low character, Call me what you want, Clara said, her voice ringing. But it does not change the truth. Dobbins wants that land, and you are helping him. A gasp went through the room. The judge's face turned white with fury. You are dismissed, madam, and you are lucky I do not have you jailed for contempt. She walked back to her spot, her head high, her whole body trembling. She had failed. She had told the truth, and they had spit on it. Jonas, the judge called. You have something to say? He said it as a joke. Jonas stepped forward. The big man dwarfed the room. He did not put his hand on the Bible. He just put his hand over it. I knew Silas, Jonas said, his voice a low rumble. I worked for him. I knew Eli. Since he was a boy, I saw the beatings. I saw the old man treat that boy worse than a dog. I saw what Silas was. He was a thief. He took this land. He took all his land from men who were broke and desperate. And Dobbins, he said, turning his head. He's just a smaller snake in the same hole. He wanted that land. He and Silas, they were partners, until Silas got too greedy. Lies, Dobbins shouted, rising. Lies from a runaway. Sit down, Dobbins, the judge said. Nervous now, the crowd was muttering. Jonas was known. He was a smith. He was not a nobody. And Eli. Jonas finished. He ain't got a killer's heart. He's got a hard fist, but he ain't a killer. He's just a man who's been hated since his first breath. He stepped down. The room was split. Clara could feel it. Some men, the ones who had been cheated by Silas, they were looking at Dobbins with new eyes. But others, the ones who just hated their faces, were harder than ever. This is all hearsay, the judge stammered. His confidence rattled. There is no proof. We have a confession. We have a body. The body's gone, a man shouted. Mr. Dobbins testified he found a body, the judge shouted back. This court finds that the testimony is sufficient. The prisoner, Eli Mercer. Wait! The saloon door swung open. The whole room turned. Jonas. A slow, secret smile touched his lips. An old man stood in the doorway. He was ancient. His hair was a wild, white mane. His beard was down to his belt. He wore robes, or what was left of them, patched and ragged. He leaned on a gnarled staff. He looked mad. It was Preacher Davies. Jonas, Clara whispered. I rode all night, Jonas murmured, not looking at her. He's a hard man to find, and a harder man to move. The preacher stepped in. He banged his staff on the floor. Thud. The room went silent. Who, the judge said, in God's name are you? I am the man you all forgot, the preacher's voice boomed, clear as a bell, not the voice of a frail old man. I am Jedediah Davies, and I brought God to this valley before he pointed at the judge, brought his law books, and before he pointed at Dobbins, brought his greed. He walked to the front. He did not look at the judge. He looked at Eli. A deep, sad pity came into his eyes. I knew his mother, the preacher said, his voice now quiet. The saloon was so silent, they could hear the drip of water from the roof. She was not a camp girl, he said. She was not a pagan. Her name was She Who Waits, and she was his wife. What? Dobbins breathed. Silas Mercer, the preacher said, turning his burning eyes on the court, brought that girl to me
24, 25 years ago. He had captured her, but he was afraid. She was with child, his child. He was afraid of the sin, afraid of the mark on the boy. So he brought her to my church with a rifle. He put that rifle to my head, and he made me marry them. He forced me in the eyes of God. He said he thought it would make it clean, a secret marriage, to make the boy legitimate. The preacher pointed a gnarled finger at Eli. That man, Eli Mercer, he is not a bastard. He is the legal son, the only legal son, of Silas Mercer, which means that ranch, that land, everything, it belongs to him. The saloon exploded. It was not cheers. It was a roar of confusion, of rage. Men were shouting, "It's a lie. He's senile. The breed gets the land. Dobbins, you said—" Dobbins' face was purple. "He's mad. He's a crazy old hermit. This is a trick." The judge was banging the bottle on the bar. "Order! Order! This is madness! This court does not recognize a forced marriage. A marriage to a savage. It is not valid." He was losing. The crowd was divided. The law was slipping. He had to end this. "The testimony is irrelevant," he shouted. "The charge is murder, and on that charge, this court finds the prisoner guilty." "No!" Clara screamed. The judge pointed at Eli. "The sentence is death by hanging, to be carried out at—" "Wait!" Clara moved. She pushed through the crowd. She stood in front of the judge. "You can't—" "It is done, ma'am," the judge said, his eyes full of cold triumph. "No." She reached inside her dress, her fingers, trembling, found the string. She had not told Eli. She had not told Jonas. When she had been in Silas's room, when she had found the letter, she had found something else. In the back of the desk, in a small velvet box, a heavy, plain, gold band, a man's wedding ring, Silas's ring, a ring he had, perhaps, worn for his first wife, the one back east, or maybe a ring for the bride he was waiting for. Her ring. She had put it on a string, a reminder. She did not know why. She pulled it out. The heavy gold ring swung in the air. The room went dead silent. "This ring," she said, her voice shaking, but carrying to every corner. "This was Silas Mercer's ring, the one he sent for me." This was a lie, a wild, desperate guess. The ring his bride was supposed to wear. She held it up. "But he never gave it to me." She turned. She walked to Eli, who was still in his chains, his face a mask of stunned, terrified confusion. She looked at him, and she spoke. Not to the court, but to him. "Eli found this after his father died. He found it, and he gave it to me." She slipped the ring onto her own finger. It was too big, but it stayed. "He asked me to marry him," she said, her voice clear. "We were going to be married as soon as the snow cleared." A collective gasp sucked the air from the room. Dobbins's jaw hung open. Clara turned, her hand held high, the ring gleaming in the lamplight. She faced the judge. "Mr. Dobbins, he says I was kidnapped. He says I was defiled. He says Eli is a monster." She walked back to the bar. She put her hand flat on the wood. "But I was not a victim," she said. "I was a bride. His bride? We were together, by choice, my choice." She looked the judge in the eye. "So if he is a liar, then I am a liar, too. If he is a murderer, then what am I? His partner? His wife?" She leaned in. "If that makes me a liar," she whispered, her voice raw, "then hang me, too." The room was broken. The hate was still there, but now it was confused. This was not a murder. This was a scandal. This was a love story, a dark, ugly, forbidden one, but not a hanging offense, not murder. The judge was trapped. He was white as a sheet. He could not hang Eli for murder if the kidnapped woman was his fiancée, and he could not hang a white woman. Not here, not now. Not for this. He looked at Dobbins, his eyes full of murder. He looked at the crowd. They were on a knife edge. "This is a mockery," he sputtered. "This trial is sham." He banged the bottle. "This court will deliberate," he shouted. "Deliberation. The prisoner is returned to his cell. Court adjourned." He fled, pushing through the back door of the saloon. The sheriff, his face a mask of fury, grabbed Eli. Get up, you—" He and two of Dobbins's men dragged Eli out, back to the jail. Eli looked back. Just once. He looked at Clara. He did not look saved. He looked terrified. He knew, and she knew. This was not over. They had just delayed it. That night, the town was quiet. Too quiet. Clara was in her room at the inn. Jonas was outside her door, sitting on a chair, that heavy rasp across his knees. He would not leave her. "Ma'am," he had said, his voice full of awe. "That was the bravest, wildest lie I ever did see." "It wasn't all a lie, Jonas," she had whispered, looking at the ring on her finger. Not the important parts. She was staring out the window, at the dark stone box of the jail across the street. Waiting. For what? She did not know. Then she saw it. A flicker. Not at the jail, at the sheriff's office. A small, orange glow, blooming in the back window. "Jonas," she whispered. Then a shout from the street. "Fire!" They ran out onto the boardwalk. The sheriff's office. The wooden office was burning. Flames were already licking out the windows, climbing the false front. Dobbins. It had to be. A fire. An accident. A way to solve the problem. The stone jail was not on fire, but it was attached to the office, and the roof was pine. "Oh, God!" Clara screamed. "They're burning him alive!" The town was pouring into the street, men shouting, pointing. "Clara, no!" Jonas yelled, grabbing her arm as she started to run. "It's a furnace! You can't—" "He's in there!" she shrieked. She ripped her arm from his grasp. She ran across the muddy street, straight at the burning building. The front door was a solid wall of orange flame. She did not stop. She held her breath, covered her face, and ran right through it. It was hell. The heat was a physical blow. The office was a small room, and it was already an inferno. Smoke, black and choking, filled the air. "Clara!" She heard Eli's voice, a desperate, choked roar from the cell. The key rack, it was on the wall. She could see it, through the smoke. The wall was on fire. She ran to it. The flames licked at her dress, at her hair. She grabbed the heavy ring of keys. The metal was hot. It seared her palm. She screamed, but she did not let go. The door to the jail. It was thick wood. It was smoking, the paint blistering. It was locked. She jammed the keys at the hole. Her hands were shaking. Her lungs were on fire. She was crying, coughing, blind. "Eli, I'm here!" "Get out!" he roared from the other side. "Clara, go! The roof!" "No." She found the key. It slid in. The lock turned. She threw the door open. The cell, it was not on fire. It was full of black smoke. It was an oven. Smoke was pouring in through the barred window, from the burning roof. Eli was on the floor. He was shackled to the wall, the chain short. He was coughing, his body convulsing. "The shackle," he gasped. "The keys!" She fell to her knees. She could not see. She fumbled at the lock on the wall, the keys rattling, her burned hand screaming in pain. "Clara, go, please," he whispered. "Save yourself." "I am not leaving you," she coughed, the words tearing her throat. The key found the hole. Click. The shackles sprang open. He did not wait. He was weak, but his will was iron. He grabbed her. He pulled her up. "My shirt," he gasped. He ripped the sleeve from his torn shirt and pressed it over her mouth and nose. "The office. It's the only way. Stay low. Run! He put his body between her and the open door to the office. Now! He charged. He was a bull. He held her against his back, his body shielding her, and plunged back into the inferno. Clara screamed into the cloth. The heat was... it was unbelievable. She felt her hair singe. The ceiling above them groaned. A terrible, cracking sound. They burst out. They fell. They exploded out of the front door. A cloud of smoke and fire and sparks. They landed in the mud, rolling, gasping. Clara looked up. She was alive. She was breathing. Cold, clean, muddy air. She was alive. The entire town was standing there, silent, watching. Dobbins was at the front of the crowd, his face lit by the flames, a mask of pure, murderous rage. His plan, his perfect, simple plan had failed. Eli got to his feet. He was raw. He was black with soot. His clothes were smoking. He pulled Clara up. Jonas ran to them, throwing his own coat over Clara. Eli stood there. He put his arm around Clara. They stood together, in the mud, in the firelight, in front of the whole town, hunted, hated, but alive, and together. It was a picture made of hellfire and mud. The sheriff's office was a column of roaring flame, painting the whole muddy street red. The crowd was silent, just a ring of pale, stunned faces. And in the middle of it all, two figures, black with soot, smoking, and holding each other up. Eli and Clara. Dobbins' face, lit by the fire he had set, was a mask of pure, twisted rage. His plan had not just failed, it had backfired. He had burned down his own land office, which was right next door. "He ain't going nowhere," Dobbins roared. He was a man undone, a rabid dog. He pulled his pistol. "He's mine!" He fired. The shot was wild. It sang past Eli's ear. But before he could fire again, Jonas moved. The big man didn't draw a gun. He roared. It was the sound of a grizzly. He grabbed the heavy water trough from the boardwalk and heaved it. The trough, half full of slimy water, crashed into the street, taking two of Dobbins' men down. It was chaos. "Run!" Jonas bellowed, turning on Dobbins. "Eli, you and the lady, my horses, back of the smithy, saddled, go, go!" Eli did not wait. There was no trial, there was no law, there was only fire and lead. He grabbed Clara's hand. "Stay low!" They ran. They plunged back into the smoke, not into the fire, but between the buildings, into the dark, wet alley. Behind them, they heard Jonas's roar again, the sound of a fist hitting bone, men shouting, a few more shots, but they were wide, fired into the chaos. They reached the smithy. The back door was open. Two horses, Jonas's own, strong-legged mountain horses, stood there, saddled and ready, their saddlebags full. Jonas had known. He had planned for this. Eli threw Clara onto the mare. He swung up onto the stallion. He looked back, just once. Through the smoke, he could see Jonas, standing like a giant in the middle of the street, holding Dobbins' men at bay. He was leaving his only friend. "Eli, now!" Clara cried, kicking her horse. He turned. He kicked the stallion, and they burst out of the alley, across the half-frozen creek, and into the blackness of the high country. They did not follow a road. They aimed for the pass. They aimed north. They rode. They rode like the devil was on their heels, because he was. They rode north, where the snow was still deep, where the passes were choked with ice. They rode into country that did not want men. It was God's anvil. They rode for 2 days, hunted. Eli was a machine, his face a mask of soot and blood, his one good eye scanning the back trail. Clara was broken. Her hands were raw, seared flesh from the hot keys. Her lungs felt like they were full of ash. She was coughing, a dry, racking sound. They rode through streams to hide their tracks. They rode at night, the moon a sliver of ice. Eli was hurt, the beatings and the fire. He was moving on pure will. Clara could see him swaying in the saddle. On the third morning, they came over a high, wind-blasted ridge. The world was just white snow and black rock. Eli stopped his horse. He just stopped. He was done.
Eli,
Clara whispered, her voice gone.
Just a little further.
He just shook his head. He was spent. And then she saw it, down in the hollow, tucked against a cliff face. It was a skeleton, a ruin, the stone walls of a small building with half a roof. It was an old mission, a broken church, left by priests who had tried to teach God to the wind, and lost. There, she breathed. Shelter. They half fell, half slid down the slope. The horses, their heads low, staggered into the lee of the wind. Eli got off his horse. He took 2 steps, and he fell, face first, into the snow. Eli! She fell beside him. He was alive, just empty. She dragged him. She got him inside those 4 broken walls. There was a hearth, a rusted, broken stove. It was shelter. She got the horses unbound. She got the saddlebags. She got the blankets. She did not fall. She tended to him. Days bled into one another. The world was just those 4 stone walls. The wind howled outside, but it could not get them. Clara tended his wounds, the cuts on his face, the deep, purple bruises on his ribs, the burns on his arms and back from that last charge through the fire. She washed him with melted snow. And he tended to hers, her hands. They were a mess, red, weeping, blistering. He took a tin of axle grease from Jonas's saddlebag. "It'll keep the air off," he whispered, his voice rough. He dressed her hands, so gentle. His rough, calloused fingers, they were softer than silk. He cut the singed, brittle ends of her hair with his skinning knife. It was not the desperate, hungry intimacy of the cabin. It was quiet. It was careful. They were 2 broken things, mending each other. They built a life, a tiny, secret life. Eli, he came back. He was a survivor. He found his strength. He set snares, using the wire from Jonas's bag. They ate snowshoe rabbits. He found an old, rusted stovepipe in the ruins, and he fixed the chimney. They had a fire that did not fill the room with smoke. Clara, she was strong. She found old missionary sacks in a collapsed side room. She used her mending needle and she patched the roof. They had a home. Their love. It was not the fire of the ranch. It was the coals. It was a deep, steady, burning heat. They talked. They had time. He told her his mother's name. "She who waits," he said, staring into the fire. "That's what the preacher called her. That's what she was, just waiting." She told him about her father's laugh, how it sounded like geese. They would lie together at night, under the blankets, his body a solid, warm wall against her back. They would just breathe, together. But as Eli's body mended, Clara, she started to worry. His spirit, it seemed to fade. He grew quieter than he had ever been. He would go out to check his snares and be gone for hours. She would find him just standing on the ridge, staring south, staring at the town, at the ranch. He was becoming more ghost than man. He was healed, but he was caged. He was a hunted man. He believed it. He was living the life his mother had lived, hidden, waiting. He was waiting for the hoofbeats. He was waiting for Dobbins to find them. He believed he had dragged her into his nothingness, that this was all he had to offer, a cold ruin on a high mountain. "Eli," she would say, touching his arm, "talk to me." He would just shake his head. "Nothing to say, Clara, just watchin'." He was hollow. Then, one afternoon, a rider. Eli saw him first, a single man, riding slow, up the hollow. Eli was inside in a second. He did not go for the rifle. He went to Clara. He put her behind him. He was just going to stand. A wall. The rider stopped. He was not Dobbins. "Eli?" Clara whispered, peering around him. Oh my God! Eli, it's Jonas! Jonas, he rode into their small, hidden yard. He looked tired. He looked old, but he was smiling. He swung down from his horse. Eli just stared. He could not believe it. Jonas stepped up, and he did not shake his hand. He pulled Eli into a hug, a huge, bone-crushing, bear hug. I thought I lost you, boy. Jonas rumbled, his voice thick. I thought the mountains or Dobbins had got you. Eli, he just held on. He held on to his only friend. That night, they sat by the fire. Jonas had brought coffee, real coffee, and flour, and salt. It was a feast. And he brought news. It all fell apart back in Marble Ridge, he said, sipping the hot coffee. After you ran, it was a thing to see. Dobbins, he had gone mad. The fire he set, it did not just burn the jail. It caught the land office. His land office. It burned. It burned to the ground. Every deed, every map, every one of Silas's and Dobbins's crooked claims. All ash. The judge, Jonas said. He tried to blame me for the riot, for the fire, but the town, they saw Dobbins's face. They knew he said it, and that old preacher, his words, they stuck. All those men Silas had cheated. They found their voice. Dobbins, in his rage, he had attacked the sheriff. He beat him right in the street for letting Eli escape. See, Jonas said. Dobbins, he ain't smart. He's just mean, and his meanness finally boiled over. The town they turned on him. Hard. The judge, he saw his partner was a madman. He saw his own deeds. His own money was now just ash. He panicked. He reversed the sentence. He declared Eli Mercer innocent, just to wash his hands of the whole bloody mess. Dobbins, Eli's voice was a rasp. In his own cell, Jonas said, a grim smile. Or what's left of it. They're holding him for a federal marshal, for arson, for attempted murder. He's done, Eli, he's done. The silence was huge. Eli. He looked like a man who had been told the mountain was just air. He was free. His name was clear. Clara was crying. She was laughing. She grabbed Eli's arm. Eli, she wept. We're free. We can go back. We can go home. Jonas's face darkened. He put his cup down. No, ma'am, he said, his voice soft. No, you can't. The joy, it just died. What? Clara whispered. Eli's name. Jonas said. It's clear of murder. Yes, but the rest. What that preacher said. What you said, ma'am, with the ring. It just made it worse for some. Eli looked at him, the ghost coming back into his eyes. They don't hate you for killing Silas no more, Eli, Jonas said, his voice heavy. They hate you for living. They hate you for being Silas's son, for being with her. Jonas looked at the floor. He's not a killer in their eyes. Eli, he's an heir, a breed heir. And they hate that more. They can't stand it. If you go back, you won't hang. No, you'll just get a bullet in the back. Quiet like. One night, a tragic accident. You can never go back. The freedom, it was just a bigger cage. Eli, he sank. He sank back into himself. He was a ghost again, trapped. The ranch, the land, it was still a prison, even if he was innocent. Clara watched him. She saw the trap. The name, the land, it was all a poison. She knelt. She knelt in front of him. She took his hands, his scarred, calloused hands. Then we don't go back, she said, her voice clear. He looked at her. There's nowhere else. Clara. Jonas, she said, not looking away from Eli. You said Dobbins's deeds, they burned? Every last one. Jonas said, ash. Then the ranch, Clara said, her voice strong. It's not yours.
Eli, it's not anyone's. It's just ash. Like we made the ledger. It's gone.
Clara, he whispered. Go west, she said. Not north, west, to Oregon, to the sea. I've heard it's green. It never snows.
She squeezed his hands. We'll change our name. Smith, Brown, Jones, whatever we want. We'll burn the past, Eli, all of it. We won't be Silas Mercer's son and Thomas Bellow's widow. We'll just be a man, a woman. We'll be my husband. He stared at her scarred hands, holding at her face streaked with soot, but she was beautiful. He looked at Jonas. Jonas. He nodded, a slow, sad, proud nod. It's the only way, boy. Out there. A man's name is what he makes it, not what he's given. You can be whoever you want to be. Eli looked back at Clara. He was leaving the only land he had ever known. He was leaving the only friend he had ever had. He nodded. Just once, west, he said. Jonas left them his supplies. He took Eli's worn-out horse. He would ride south. He would just go. I'll be all right, he said. A good smith can always find work. They agreed. At sunrise, they would ride. The sunrise? It was pink and gray, cold. They stood outside the broken church. Eli. He pulled something from his old saddlebag. It was a heavy silver belt buckle. Ornate. It was Silas's. The mark of the man. The brand. Clara nodded. She reached into her own small bag. She pulled out a thin, plain gold band. Her ring from Thomas. The ring she had pulled off her finger by the fire. All that time ago. Her first shackle. They dug a small hole in the frozen ground right beneath the floor of that broken church. Eli looked at the buckle. He dropped it in. Clara looked at the ring. She let it fall. Silas's pride and her shame, they buried them, together. They covered the hole. They said no words. They did not need to. That last night, it was their last night in the high country. The wind howled, but the fire was warm. They lay on their bedroll, together. But Eli, he was stiff, he was hesitant, he was free, he was a new man, but the ghost was still there, the ghost that whispered he didn't deserve her. He didn't deserve this. He lay on his back. He stared at the broken roof. Clara, he whispered, his voice rough. I got nothing. I ain't Silas. I ain't even a Mercer. I'm just me. I got no land, no name. I got nothing to give you. He was still afraid. He was afraid he was not enough. Clara turned. She propped herself up on her elbow. The firelight. It danced on her face, her burned hands, her soft eyes. She smiled. A slow, a real smile. She laid her hand, her scarred, burned hand on his chest. She slid it down, over his flat stomach. She slipped her fingers just beneath the waistband of his rough canvas trousers, just under his belt. He froze. He stopped breathing, just like he did that first night, by the fire, at the ranch. I told you, she whispered. Her voice was, it was just love. It was just warmth. It fits just fine. He let out a breath. He let out a breath he had been holding his entire life. The ghost, it just dissolved. It went away. He turned. He pulled her down. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside. But in that cold, broken church, they held each other. They made love. Not like fugitives. Not like angry, hurt animals. Not like a payment or a debt. They made love like they were the last two hearts left on earth. Like they were the first. The next morning, the sun was bright. The air was cold and clean. They rode out. They did not look back. They rode west, toward the new sun. They stopped just for a second at the top of the high pass. They looked back one last time, at the cold, white valley, his prison, her crucible. Eli, he looked at Clara. She smiled at him. He kicked his horse.
They rode out. They didn't look back again. They rode not as fugitives, not as a breed and a broken widow. They rode out as lovers, remade and free. Thank you kindly for listening to our story. We'd sure love to hear where you're all listening from. So drop a comment below and connect with folks. Please subscribe to the From Wild West channel. And do not forget to share your thoughts.